Morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Elire Strategy Summit. We're excited to host you all for another great day of sessions. And this is the How to Select the Right Technology for Your Business, presented by Jason McCabe and Edmund Glasenapp. My name is Katie Bolt, and I'm the Business Development Associate here at Elire. And I'm one of the moderators you're going to hear throughout the sessions today. Before we get started, I just have a couple of housekeeping items to cover. Everyone has been placed on mute for the presentation. There's going to be 2 poll questions throughout. We would love your participation. If time allows at the end, we're going to have a live Q&A, and you can submit your questions in the Q&A portal at the bottom of your screen. And if you were unable to join us yesterday or this morning for any of those sessions, all session recordings will be sent out next week. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Edmund to kick it off.
Hey, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. I want to welcome you to our session on how to select the right technology for your business, building an application roadmap. Okay, so let's jump into the agenda. We're going to do quick intros on Elire. If you've joined previous sessions, this might be a little repetitive, but then we'll jump into introducing myself and Jason McCabe. And primarily we want to discuss organizational readiness for your IT transformation in general, and then any key considerations around transformation that we want to highlight as well, and then ultimately going into building an application roadmap and what that looks like. And then hopefully we'll have some questions at the end that we can answer, and we'll provide some next steps. Okay, so about Elire. So Elire is a full service consulting firm established in 2005, and we're celebrating 15 years of business. We help our clients succeed by partnering with them to efficiently implement, integrate, optimize, and upgrade their software investments. We provide strategic guidance. That's part of our core foundation. That's why we're doing this conference. And we assist with best practice core business process improvements. And we specialize in helping unlock the potential of software investments as well. We have a deep commitment to excellence and quality. That's one of our core values. From a management advisory services standpoint, we do application roadmaps, business process improvements, end user adoption and change management, data analytics and visualization, and of course, project management. And so I am going to let Jason introduce himself at this point.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jason McCabe. I have been with Elire just over 10 years now, working on ERP implementations, optimization, support, and since 2015 on advisory services and helping customers and organizations make strategic decisions about what they want to do for the future and how they want to improve their current state potentially, or work with delivery teams to, in conjunction during a project, also look at the organization itself, not just technology, to make improvements. And we're going to get into that, what that means later on the roadmap side. But I'm a designated project manager professional. I'm really looking forward to sharing some more ideas on what we see in the market today.
Thank you, Jason. My name is Edmund Glasenapp. I have been with Elire for 9 years, and I do want to call something out. Jason didn't mention this, but Jason and I are actually close friends from back in the day, and Jason actually helped me get into Elire 9 years ago, and so we've been working together for a long time. And he is, as you see, a practice lead, and I am too. I'm more on the treasury advisory side, so I'm in a different area, but we both have some of the same foundational approaches when it comes to project management and strategy. And so just wanted to highlight that. And ultimately, I also help clients choose the right applications for their treasury management systems. Okay, so I'm going to pass this on to Jason and simply ask you what can we do to get ready for an IT transformation?
Yeah, thanks. Organizational readiness for IT transformation. What does that mean? We like to start off today because the idea of creating a roadmap or just starting off with an IT implementation or a transformation, it's a big deal. It's a big decision. And kind of on the next slide, you'll kind of understand some of those things. The key principles that we're seeing are what an organization needs to think about. Are you prepared? What have you done to come to this realization that you need to do a big IT transformation? You know, that's a lot of change to bite off and a lot of investment and a lot of people's time. Everyone has busy schedules as it is, and adding projects on top of that is a big deal. So thinking about, are we ready for this? Are we prepared? Why are we doing this? Is kind of critical to even start the process to build a roadmap, which is the starting process to do a project. You think about it that way. So we're going to talk about things to be mindful of as you begin the process, making sure you've identified a plan, identified strategic goals, objectives, the purpose driving the change, stakeholder alignment, and then having resources aligned and dedicated and ready to do this kind of project is going to be critical. And we're going to talk about how to incorporate that into a plan and what are key things you want to look into.
So that brings us to our first poll question.
Thank you, Edmund. The first poll question is going to be, is your organization considering an IT transformation initiative? I'll give about 20 seconds to answer. Ten to 15 more seconds. Votes are still rolling in.
Hopefully everyone's at all done and they love it. That's what I'm hoping to hear.
I'm going to close it out here and share the results. So it looks like the top option is not started, but a plan is in place.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right, we've checked the first box. We're good. We're for 42% of the team.
Yeah.
All right.
And you're in the right place.
Cool. Some of the things that we've seen over the last few years, especially with the change in technology, architecture, new high technology kind of things. Think last year with COVID and forcing organizations to move to fully remote, not being in a normal office setting. What we found are two things really stand out, which are driving organizations today for these IT transformations. And we kind of bucketed them together and having it's the right reason or it's the right time. So, and things that roll up for that, for a right reason, looking to reduce infrastructure and costs, right? Everyone's trying to increase margins. Reducing costs is a great way to do that. The agile workplace, being able to work remotely, different locations, potentially not having a brick and mortar office is critical kind of in this day and age, especially as you're trying to be attractive to new talent for your company, and having that flexibility is critical. And a legacy application that's moving out of support is a good time to think about, do we want to upgrade this? Is it making sense for our organization now? Have we grown? Have we shrunk? Are we getting the most value out of this investment? And then looking to centralize and take advantage of enterprise software solutions, which are really driving the SaaS-based market today. Potentially the right time also, they're kind of similar in the sense, but looking to align a new normal, get new features and functionality out of your technology. If you have an application, if your ERP is 20 years old, hasn't been upgraded for over 5 years, you might not be getting the most value out of that tool per se. We talked about moving out of support, potentially looking for a restructure. If you have a merger going on, you're bringing on new affiliates, how do you onboard them? How does that work? How does that look and feel from that perspective? And then really looking to improve your business functions and your efficiency. Okay, we've kind of made the decision. We have a plan in place. What's the next step? Where do you start? I love the graphic and the idea of, let's start with a blank sheet and think about what we really want out of the system. Not necessarily what do we do today and how do we get what we do today into the new system. That lift and shift mentality is kind of going away, and it's really trying to figure out, how do we adopt something different? How do we make an improvement with our organization, and are we doing the most efficient things? Like, what's the industry pushing us? Are we taking advantage of the investment we're making in these applications? So really doing some research, focusing on that future state, and letting the application functionality potentially drive what you want to do. So as a project manager, you need to think about, how do we push our stakeholders with that mentality? How do we, resist change? Like, how do we move away from resisting change and understanding that it is a good time for us to think about doing some things that are different? This is hard, right? Change is hard, and managing that is going to be a big part of any of these projects. So not just thinking about your current state fully for your future, but switching the mindset to think about, what can I do to help utilize this application better to improve my organization and maturity? Everyone's gonna be different, right? You can read a bunch of case studies about how their organization have done it, but ideally your organization is gonna be unique to you in some regard. So make sure you take that into consideration. What's important for you? What's gonna drive your stakeholders and your team to be okay and ready for this project? Not just cramming something into them that they think is the right solution.
No, I really like that first point you're making here too, that there's no one way, because I get asked all the time, well, how do others do it? How do others do it? And they're looking for that one way, that one magic pill, and that isn't something that you can do, right? So at the end of the day, you need to start this way, and you need to take this approach. So I really like this.
Yeah, it's a good point. Really, and I just to reiterate, that's a great call. Everyone wants to hear other examples and other clients. How do they do it? How do they do it? We're similar to them, but you are, but you aren't. So don't get so hung up on that we need to follow a path. And what we're trying to say is, you need to build your own path and understand your own organization's ability to handle this change. And being able to manage that in an effective way is going to be critical. So kind of that bottom point, create a roadmap which works for your organization. That's key, right? Figure out what things you can bite off at one time and go from there, and what makes the most sense from a change perspective. So on the next slide, we kind of have an example. When looking at your transformation initiative, what you'll see here is this wasn't a once and done big bang project. This is a multi-phase initiative that will take time to get there. And that's important so that organization can really take the time when you need to implement the change you want to, and bite off what's your key objective with this phase. And then you can attack it. It's nice to want to do everything at once, but that's overwhelming and hard to manage. So streamline, making effective decisions about what your objectives are for each phase is going to be the most impactful for your organization to change at the correct pace and really see the value at the end, versus a potentially large project that's implemented, but your processes are broken, things are not working efficiently, your team's not trained, your team doesn't know how to use this new technology that's amazing, that everyone says is amazing, but it's really more burdensome than what you had before. So really plan out your event. So this is an example of a SaaS solution, potentially getting on the application first, starting to understand the system, figure it out, then look to enhance from an analytical reporting standpoint with an optimization, and then finally really looking to take full automation of that future technology that's going to be released to it as you continue to get upgraded and you're more familiar with the application and the tools.
So what are the key considerations?
Kind of going back to the start, we need to figure out what's important, what's driving the decision, and then defining that to come up with a plan. Some of the main ones that we see that are going to help any project manager or organization looking at this IT transformation initiative, the opportunity for business process redesign, that's taking a hard look at your current way of doing things, looking at what potentially your future state could look like, and figure out the implementation of that change. Change management is a huge component, especially if you're looking to change applications or change technologies, because that is going to be tough for your organization to take on. Anyone that's telling you it's not is not being realistic to your team. So being mindful of that, addressing that right away, and having a plan in place. We have a session, I think later today, purely on change management, that I would recommend anybody that is in this planning a transformation project needs to be on that, because this is something you want to address with your project, or you're just not setting yourself up for success. Key things with an actual transformation implementation you might be seeing will be data conversion, integration, reporting, security requirements. I went through those specific a little bit faster because those are probably areas that you're not as familiar with as a project manager, but potentially things that you're going to want to see to set your organization up for success. These are things that drive a SaaS-based solutions project timeline and success. What data are you going to move? What integrations are you going to keep? What integrations need to be rebuilt? What kind of reporting are we going to get out of it? And what's the security situation from a user standpoint? And then the IT infrastructure and architecture of the product you're about to purchase. So these are all good things for your team to factor into their roadmap to make sure you're ready for this project.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I also, just to emphasize, best practice is to have a strategy for each one of these, like a true implementation strategy. And as a PM and as a strategic leader within your organization that might be involved with a project like this, it's your responsibility to ensure those strategies are in place. And I think it's a natural focus is for the PM to focus on the top 2 points here: business process redesign, change management, and the rest are just as critical, and you need to make sure you align those stakeholders for all of those, right? So you need to make sure everyone's involved in that. So let's jump into some process redesign.
Yeah. So when I mentioned building a strategy for that, what does that really mean? It's having a process in place that you're going to follow as you work through your transformation project to identify what you're trying to accomplish with the business process redesign. With a SaaS or cloud-based solution, a lot of the business process, and from any level, right, procure to pay or just invoice processing, right, those are different levels of processes. The system should be driving a lot of what the future state should look like. And resistance to that is really setting yourself up for trouble or risk in the future. Now, that's probably hard to hear because you've been doing things one way for so long, but adoption to these solutions is going to be your best bet in your ability to understand how the application is going to work. It's going to work as efficiently for you. The vendors of these tools are following an industry best practice now. So from a business process redesign, we need to understand why does this future state process not work for us? What's our difference? What's restricting that? Which really brings us into the next strategy of change management. So have a tool in place, a process, and then some key factors, key constraints. So again, let that software drive the process design. Really work to understand the cross-functional mapping, especially if you're going to take advantage of an enterprise solution and you're going to be stretching the transaction across different teams and areas, which is definitely a recommendation. But really understand when the passing points are going to be when something goes from procurement to payables to accounting, and then the reconciliation of that. You can bring a lot of data together, which is great, but your teams need to know how to work together too within the tool. Obviously, the more detailed, the better you can do. Business process redesign, some people love it, some people hate it. The more detailed and having a real champion to manage it is going to be critical for your project. So if it's not potentially the PM, it's someone on a process person to to kind of do that documentation level of understanding, detail grabbing. We're a big proponent and fan of Visio and the shape data reports that can come out of it to really enrich data on a process map further. Guiding principles, really have an objective, make sure stakeholders are aligned. And when I say that, I don't mean top down from, CFO to support and analysts. I mean, IT and business, those procurement, purchasing, accounting teams, make sure they're working together to really drive the process and the design. And that kind of leads into the constraints, right? We're missing stakeholders. If they're not present, they can't add their value for the issues with the current state and drive the future state design. Resistance to change, which we'll talk about on the next, is a big part. And then if you don't have people that understand the vision of the future, that potentially could be another issue that you're going to have to hurdle over with that idea. People are going to be nervous about this.
And, just to emphasize that too, a roadmap, at the end of the day, a roadmap is supposed to give you that vision. And that's what hopefully will provide, some relief when it comes to some of these constraints. But let's dive into how we deal with these specifically. And that brings us to change management.
So again, change management should be a separate work stream as a part of any transformation initiative. And that team should have a methodology that they're going to follow in place. And it's important to have that from a tools perspective, so how to prepare your organization for whatever specifically is being accomplished with the project. Identification of those differences between the current state and the future state. Preparation, training, execution, and communication is going to help that project be successful. So again, we just have an example of potentially a process that could be followed, but on the next slide, I'm going to get into some of the key constraints on that. So our philosophy, really, that training and communication is part of change management. Some organizations will say something differently, but those are the key parts. So making sure that you take those on together, I think, helps streamline the process from my experience. Training is not a one-time event. It can't be just blocked off in a week. You get everybody in a room, you show them something, and you expect success, that everyone's gonna be prepared. You'll hear a lot in that session about the 5 moments of truth. People need to hear things multiple times in different formats to really grasp what is being said and what the future is going to be, especially those that are potentially not ready for this. So, have a plan in place where you're going to be sending communications at strategic times of your timeline, have multiple formats of documentation for them, different visuals, different recordings, different sessions, to give the information across different ways. People learn differently. Some people are very visual. Some people like to read. Some people need to be, told, sit in a room, try and understand your group and the impact and the amount of change that's going to happen, and figure out exactly what makes the most sense to allocate your change management team's time to get that point across. Information should be repeated. What are the key constraints? People really underestimate the amount of work and resources required to do this. It definitely needs dedicated stakeholders. We recommend multiple, depending on how much change you guys are considering in your transformation, and have change management resources that know and understand the underlying functional areas that might be going through the change too. That really helps in delivering training content. Not getting people's attention. So communications that are sent out, but they might not be impactful or effective, is not useful. So really make sure you're grabbing everyone's attention that needs to hear this. And then again, we keep saying dealing with too much change at a time. There is a certain point where you're going to be expecting too much out of your user base, and that's going to have a negative impact because it's too much for them to take on. We need to be mindful of current day-to-day tasks, as well as what this project or initiative is going to be, taking a part of their time from a work standpoint.
And something that stood out that you mentioned earlier that I really think is a great concept is basically that change champion concept. Is that part of change management is also identifying people that can help drive that message and really ensure that the message is being clearly communicated, right? Those change champions really make a difference and can really assist in making sure a project is successful. Okay, so I do want to circle back a little bit. You know, Jason, you asked some really key questions in the beginning. And, you know, if I look back at those initial questions, are you prepared? Where are you right now? Are you ready? These are great questions to ask. And you know, I want to look into what tool you can use to really answer them, right? Jason showed us the strategies that drive a lot of this, you know, but ultimately an application roadmap can be the catalyst and provide the tools that drive the actions throughout the journey of the application roadmap itself, right? So making that decision. And so let's go into what are the objectives of our application roadmap? You know, at its core, it should be a system or software agnostic assessment. It's designed to lay out the foundation for all your decision making. It sets you on the right path forward. You know, it's supposed to provide, it's supposed to let you visualize the tools, maybe the infrastructure of your future state, visualize how an implementation would look like, visualize all the phases. There's a lot of things that it should present to you and to your team to allow that comprehension. It's an approach that, you know, Jason and I always take when managing any kind of technology transformation project. And ultimately, like, it really can provide a lot of efficiencies throughout the process, end to end, for implementing a new application. And so just to throw out some examples, you know, we've assessed whether an Oracle Cloud ERP, on-prem PeopleSoft ERP, or Workday is the right ERP solution for an existing PeopleSoft customer. This is a common scenario, a common project that we see all the time, and an assessment can really drive success for this. You know, in my world, I'm looking at cloud treasury management systems and how those can be implemented for, you know, growing international corporations. We see a lot of treasury departments that are siloed or scattered, and, you know, centralization. That was one of the biggest items that Jason called out earlier. Is if you're looking to be more centralized, that could definitely be driven through an application roadmap, and to look at your business processes. And then, you know, simply, how do you define scope? If you're an existing on-prem, you have an existing on-prem legacy system and you need to upgrade to a cloud system, how do you do that? I mean, that's a big task. And Jason highlighted it's not just installing a new system. There's a lot of things that go into business process redesign and change management. And so, you know, if I had to sum it up in a way, you know, an application roadmap will help you make a thoughtful decision with confidence. By taking a holistic approach and looking at all aspects of your organization and business, not just the application itself, you can dive deeper into how you can do this. And I'm sorry, we'll dive deeper into how you can do this when we talk about process maturity a little bit later on. But the key here is that holistic approach, looking at everything, not just the technology side. An application roadmap can also knock out a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to analysis, something that you don't want to be bogged down with during an implementation, right? So by the time you get to an implementation, you want to make sure that a lot of that analysis is done, you know, and it's, as a PM, it's your responsibility responsibility to ensure that that proper analysis has been conducted in a comprehensive way. And finally, an application roadmap can also provide an accelerated timeline. By preemptively defining the decision criteria, tackling all the analysis, defining comprehensive scope, you can really ultimately optimize that timeline on when and how you want to implement. And these are just some of the benefits of a roadmap. When we see clients make an effort to actually develop some level of roadmap, it really allows them to make thoughtful decisions with confidence.
And just to kind of reiterate a couple of points there, we hear a lot of the times that organizations think the road mapping process might be a waste of time or resources. However, as that point was made, a lot of the heavy lifting can be done. I mean, you would expect a large part of your chartering process, your requirements to come out of this, your idea of a phased approach and timeline, your project planning tools should be jump-started from everything that comes out of this process or this roadmap, whatever you want to call it. So this roadmap should be impactful, is what I'm trying to say. It should help jumpstart that business case process, the idea of what the objectives, the goals, the guiding principles of that transformation initiative will come out of it and be the next step. Also, it's an ability to help apply metrics to thoughts and feelings. When we talk to organizations every day, they want to know what's the best for me. I think this is what I should do, but what do you think? Versus, well, let's use some analysis and put some numbers to paper to help justify those feelings. And that's always really interesting at the end when we present a recommendation, and any project manager probably feels the same way. Is your stakeholder really understanding what they're asking or telling you? And it really is hard to do that from a thoughts and feelings standpoint, right? We're in business. We're trying to apply, data that drives decisions. That's the goal at the end of the day.
No, thank you for that call out. That's definitely a big piece of this. Having my experience is that a lot of that analysis isn't done when we engage. If a client wants to go right into implementation, lots of times that analysis is missing, and this is where you can really provide some value. And so let's look at the strategy and the strategic approach that I've seen Jason do, that I've taken. And just to kind of highlight something, that the approach should really baseline your existing operations. It should identify your desired future state and map the path forward. Here are the steps that lay out a best practice approach. And so step one, mobilize. You want to kick off by aligning your resources with the overall goals and objectives of your project. Do some comprehensive stakeholder analysis here. On every project, we use clearly defined tools that allow us to manage and align stakeholders. This ultimately allows us to schedule workshops and define decision criteria that will drive your scope. Mobilization truly sets the foundation for a customer to select the right application. So, this is really the foundation of the roadmap, but honestly will drive the foundation of all the other elements of implementing a technology transformation and an application selection. So that's really critical to start with a strong foundation. And so step two, current state analysis. A best practice approach to current state is not only to map your business process. So we're not talking about just looking at what you do today, but always include some level of disconnect analysis. And so, what is a disconnect? A disconnect can simply be defined as anything that impedes the effectiveness or efficiency of a process. So in short, think of your pain points. And these pain points ultimately drive how you define your fit gap requirements.
Another point on that current state analysis is when you should have stakeholders aligned and working together across those cross-functional areas so that you can really start to identify what isn't really working well now with teams that might not communicate as much as you'd think. And this is kind of the jumping start to really think about change and improvement. And you're, on the first step of your roadmap, is essentially. So we see a lot of that as we help organizations with the decision making. And project managers should understand that you really need to have the whole process identified to do an analysis. And then you'll see that real value come out of that.
And you've said this to me in the past that really sticks out. One part of this current state analysis that's extremely valuable is getting people in the same room or on the same call that don't necessarily always get to voice things about the process that they're doing, right? That don't get to share those ideas with each other, right? And that alone will drive a very clear understanding of those pain points, but also the solutions and the requirements that you're going to need going forward. So that's, always something that has stuck out that you've mentioned to me in the past. And again, so after you do that current state and you go to step 3 and you do a future state assessment, you take a closer look at those disconnects that were discovered and to get a clear understanding of why they're there, right? And we use attributes and categories that we associate with those disconnects to really drive that understanding. And so that's very important. You want to make sure that everyone understands why those pain points even exist in the first place, right? And another tool that we suggest using that we've used in the past as well is a maturity assessment. And how do you measure it? It can answer some questions like, how do you measure where you're currently at, and how do you determine where you want to be? And a maturity assessment will do that and provide those details. And ultimately, all these efforts really will drive and define the requirements that you're going to need for a new application or technology transformation. And so finally, step 4, providing recommendations, laying this all out. The goal ultimately here is to allow you as a PM or a strategic thinker or the client itself to visualize the path forward and the desired future state. There has to be a clear understanding, and it has to be laid out in front of everyone so that they can understand the path. And so let's dive a little bit more into each step. Determining, I called this out earlier, Jason's called this out a few times, critical piece of step 1 is determining decision criteria. Identify decision criteria that's important to you. Below our list of common, criteria that we see, fit gap requirements is probably the most obvious one, right? You want to have requirements laid out. You want to understand what application is gonna fix that gap in a way, right? But also look at process improvements. Is it going to improve your business processes? Obviously, cost is always on top of mind. And, from an application standpoint, look at security, look at data conversion needs, look at interfaces. We also hear, usability. That's something that, might get overlooked, but usability is huge, right? It has to be something that's people are comfortable using. Mobile options. Can you access, can you use your phone to execute transactions or approve things, right? And then ultimately data architecture, application support. If you're moving to a cloud system, you better have some solid application support available to you and your team. So let's go into step 2, map processes and identify disconnects. So, you conduct work sessions and identify with identified stakeholders, and you map your current state and identify process attributes. So that's key here, is the process attributes. You don't want to just map things out. You want to identify the attributes for each step of the process so that you can actually have a clear understanding. And you can also take a future state point of view as well in this, right? You can do that. it's slightly different, but there are options here and you can take those options. What does that look like? You know, you might want to whiteboard it and have sticky notes and really drive everything in a room and have everyone chime in on each process. And that's how you can start. You can take another approach. We use SIPOC, which really highlights, you know, suppliers and inputs to each process step for that you've identified, right? And then also defines the outputs and the customers for each process. So by structuring it that way, it really drives a clear understanding of what you do today. And then you can start highlighting those disconnects that you see here in kind of the red dots here. And, you know, again, those process attributes help identify the key requirements for the future state system that you're going to ultimately choose, but in context of your existing business processes that are shown on the map. So that's, you know, that's really where it all comes together, is in these current state sessions. And so step 2 also sets a foundation to transform the way the work is done, right? And so we recommend, you know, improving your existing business processes by eliminating those disconnects rather than just doing the lift and shift concept, right? That's something that Jason called out earlier. You don't want to do the lift and shift into a new technology and then end up with the same problems and disconnects as you did before. And so again, that disconnect, that pain point, you want to look at effectiveness and how, you know, how it relates to that. Is the process producing the desired results? Efficiency, is the process producing the desired result with as few resources, time, money, people as possible? Here are some of the categories that we look at, right? We have different levels. Is it at the organizational level? Is it at the process level, performer level? And then within those levels, we can break it down even further and look at strategy, policy, organizational structure. You know, we see a lot of these disconnects at the process level. So we look at information flow, process flow. We look at the inputs and the suppliers specifically, right? And then at the performer level, are the roles and responsibilities, or the skills, is the job environment all, you know, in the right place, right? And so use this initiative to identify which disconnects can be resolved via the technology, or ultimately other improvements such as that can be resolved with the change management initiatives, right? Or business process redesign, you know, org changes, policy redesign, training. Those things all play a role in your decision. And so understanding and eliminating those disconnects, you know, once you understand where those disconnects fall, and you understand, are they at the organizational level? Are they at the process level? Are they at the performer level? Once your analysis is complete, you'll start to see the themes pop out, right, when you do your analysis. And then you'll also start to see the solutions, right? Those will be very clearly defined based on the analysis you do. And again, this ultimately will drive the way you make a decision when selecting the right application. And so let's look at the enablers of process performance. So this ties into process maturity. Process maturity assessment is a tool that will rate your overall maturity for a business process, and it can drive improvements within your organization. And this is really critical when looking at an application and making a selection. And so the way we do this is we look at the 5 enablers for each process. And so 1, we look at design. We look at the specs for the work activities within your process. Metrics, you know, we look at how the process is measured, baselined, and improved. And, you know, again, like we don't see this a lot. We don't see, when we go into projects like this, we don't see that a lot of metrics are being captured. It definitely doesn't get the love that it should, you know, and low maturity here might mean that where there's really no insight into the data. And, you know, you don't know how long it takes to do things. You don't know how to identify the health of a process, right? High maturity means that you do have metrics that you're using all the time to identify how your processes are doing, right? Also look at owners, executive with the overall accountability and responsibility for the process and its performers. Owners have to be clearly identified, and the key here is the accountability piece and the responsibility piece, like having a key understanding of that. Performers, right? Who's executing the process? Do they have the skills in place to execute the processes? Do they have the right knowledge, right? You might need more training. Something that gets overlooked or sometimes doesn't get addressed is what's their overall attitude towards the process, right? There's always a process, I have a ton of them, and that I just don't like doing, right? Is there a solution to that, right? But this is an opportunity to identify it and understand where it is and how mature that process is. And then more on the technology side, looking at infrastructure, the information systems that support the processes that we're talking about. And ultimately, an application roadmap clearly drives this enabler, right? But the argument here is simply that if you don't look at design, you don't look at metrics, owners, performers, your process is not going to improve. You need to push the needle on each one of these for you to be able to get to the next step, not just technology. And so I wanted to present a little bit of how you measure maturity in general, right? And so, how is it measured? We say it's measured on a continuum. Some processes might be informal, they're unorganized or chaotic. They have no defined process, right? Some processes might be more functional and they operate consistently. They're reliable, predictable, manageable. Some processes might be standardized and high performing. They consist of end-to-end design, right? They have those elements within them. Some processes might be on the collaborative side and they integrate with other processes throughout the organization. In application, depending on how big, if it's a cloud implementation and it's cloud ERP, it needs to be able to touch many different departments and within your organization. That means your processes need to match that, right? They need to be able to collaborate. And then ultimately, where maybe everyone is striving to be is a leading level of maturity for those processes. And these are, when we say this, they extend outside of your organization, right? How do you communicate with your suppliers, right? Not just how do you manage your suppliers internally, but how are you actually communicating with them? And is that actually, yielding world-class results? Is that what you're aiming towards? And so we do have another poll question that I want to throw out there. How would you rate the maturity of your business processes? Do you rate them informal, functional? Are you standardized, more collaborative, or even leading?
While everyone's answering the poll question, I just wanted to put a reminder in that you guys can continue to submit your questions in the Q&A portal at the bottom of your screen. It looks like our content will probably run us to the top of the hour, so I can drop in my email and we'll also follow up with everyone individually after the session. I'll close it out here, Edmund.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so very clear, answers are functional. And so, functional is a great place to start because it means things are working, but there's a lot of room for improvement, right? So, that's a good place to be. And so at the end of the day, you want to be able to visualize what this means when it comes to process maturity. One way that you can visualize this is to lay out your processes. We have at a high level, AP, supplier onboarding, project costing, payroll, benefits, dashboards, analytics, and reporting, critical processes to an organization. We can lay out the levels that you're striving towards. You can identify where you are and where you want to be. If we look at supplier onboarding, maybe that's something that's not necessarily going to be something you can get to the next level. Maybe it just changes, right? Project costing, maybe there's something that will really drive changes and turn it into a more collaborative process. Payroll, some processes, maybe it's very informal and you just, there's a hero at your organization that just makes it work every month, right? But you don't want to stay there. You want to move to a more standardized approach. And so these are conceptually, this is what you want to do when it comes to process maturity and when you look at all this. Diving into a little bit more of the next step here, fit gap requirements, those work sessions and those stakeholders ultimately need to finalize and prioritize all that analysis and really drive requirements for your fit gap, right? So this is a clearly defined deliverable that you're going to need to identify with the vendor of that application to make sure that you're going down the right path. And a PM or a strategic thinker should be able to provide the best practice approach for this. And then ultimately laying out those recommendations. Again, you want to lay out the analysis in a very clear way. You want to provide, an overview of those fit gap requirements. You want to provide, any other details that really drive recommendations. And, again, circle back to your decision criteria. What were those criteria? That's what's going to be in your recommendation. That's what's going to ultimately be visualized for everyone to see. Again, here's some more, more visuals of what a recommendation might look like, a strategic roadmap, a cash management treasury approach. You can even do this at the project level, right? The project portfolio level, and laying out all the priority for all the projects within your organization. And then obviously the change management piece that we talked about earlier was very critical, laying out those 5 moments of need, which you'll hear a lot about in the change management session coming up. And so finally, to conclude, we have, again, I just want to circle back to some of what Jason highlighted earlier, are, these establishing the strategies for those key considerations. We looked at business process redesign, we looked at change management, and we really highlighted those because those will really drive success, right? But you can't forget about some of the more application focused elements here around data conversion, around integrations, around reporting and security. And then ultimately, defining that roadmap, look at that key decision criteria that's critical, right? Reviewing your current state, establishing process maturity, and then ultimately defining clear goals and objectives. And so I know we're cutting it pretty close. I will open it up to see if there are any questions. Please chime in if needed.
I don't see any yet. And while we're waiting, I think one of the main points on that roadmap is don't just look at a technology and an application. That idea of that process maturity assessment is looking at how your organization is designed outside of IT. How is it structured? Are there policies and procedures in place? Are there resources assigned? Do people know what their responsibilities are? Is there a process that they're following? That the maturity assessment is really designed to look at the organization itself, not just technology. And that's important because your roadmap should be more encompassing than just an application. It should be really trying to drive that change. So be holistic in that approach That's what that means. Don't just look at a solution. Look at how your organization is set up to be simple, and then identify where it's not, and then use that to catapult you. And don't assume you have to be a P4 leading. Most organizations are not there, but where can you make strategic improvements to help your team members have a more structured process in place and a happier lifestyle, to help not make them work 24 hours a day, so they can have that work-life balance per se. If you are in that firefighting mode, how do you get out of that? That would be a great leap forward from like a informal to a functional. That could be a big step.
Very big step. And that's what we see a lot of times, just implementing technology is just kind of just one element of really driving maturity within your organization. Critical, but you need those other enablers, that you need to think of it that way. People, process, and technology. That's really what we drive for and what we push. So I do want to call out, I'm not seeing any questions right now, but I do want to call out that we have another session coming up on testing strategy and really looking at end-to-end testing to ensure success. Should be a great session. That's at 1 p.m. Central. And so please join that. And also in the chat box, Katie actually added a link to building a successful change management strategy. And so this was something that we talked about quite a bit. Please consider joining that as well. There's going to be a ton of great information there. Stephen, who's hosting that one, is extremely knowledgeable and has really provided lots of successful implementations. So throwing that out there. So we're coming up to the end of the hour. Thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate it. Thank you for the time. Here are the, kind of the LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube links if you're interested. And honestly, feel free to reach out to us directly as well. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great afternoon.